Okay, last week or last time we just talked about it, we finished with Freud, and we're going to spend the next couple of times today and part of next time talking about some of the theories that came off of Freud's. The first one we're going to talk about is the theory, let's go to the PowerPoint, of Erik Erikson. There he is. Erikson actually studied with Freud's. See if you can get my picture in the corner there when you get around to it. He studied with Freud's, come back to me. He studied with Freud's daughter, Anna Freud, who was a pretty classical Freudian. And he lived, so he came after Freud, and he lived to be an old man. So he was writing and working well into the 1990s. Even when he was a very old man, he was in his 90s. He had a wife who was a little younger than he was, and she actually helped him with the technical parts of writing. Let's go back to the PowerPoint. Freud's theory, as we saw, is a psychosexual theory. Thank you for getting me in there. And Erikson's theory is a psychosocial theory. Now, Erikson claimed to be expanding on Freud's theory. What he said was, come back to me, what he said was, look, Freud, I'm not debating what Freud said. I kind of agree with Freud. But there's a social aspect as well as just a familial aspect to development. But the truth is, he does disagree with Freud. The truth is, he's one of the people, Adler is one to some extent, and finally we're going to see the humanists who say to Freud, I don't agree with you that everybody's nuts. I don't agree with you that all the good things people do, that when a person goes to paint a beautiful picture, it's simply the person wanting to smear his or her feces, right? Today's his day, on the day I'm broadcasting this. I don't agree with you that all the kinds of things people do is just sublimations of, that's a word that Freud used. In other words, you're sublimating your real instinct and bringing it out in a socially respectable way. So the neurosurgeon who's saving lives is the person who's not really sublimating their wish to cut and kill people, right? Not everything we do is a defense mechanism against these terrible id urges. Now, Erikson never said that, but we can see that he's going to talk about healthy and unhealthy development rather than defense mechanisms to sublimate and push down. I don't know if I use the word sublimate with Freud, but that's the word he's talking about, to sublimate and push down all these id urges, okay? Now, so what we get from Erikson, let's go back to the PowerPoint, is this idea of an epigenetic, what he calls an epigenetic principle. There's a natural, predetermined order to development for all human beings in every culture. And by the way, Erikson did a lot of, at the time, was called anthropological work. He was well aware of other cultures, other than, first he lived in Europe, and then he moved to America. Okay? He said personality follows a sequence of inner predetermined laws. And each person develops through a sequence of stages, through a sequence of stages that emerge in accordance with his preset plan. They're coming. Okay? And he says at each stage, a person is confronted with a crisis that must be resolved. So we can see already, he says that each crisis is represented by a healthy or an unhealthy resolution that can be represented as polar opposites on a straight line. Okay, see if you can get my picture in the corner there. So what Erikson is saying is, look, it's not true that everyone is basically full of these crazy urges and that we're basically all full of rage and anger and desire inside, and the development is a matter of trying to push it down and keep it down. Rather, he's saying, look, we're at each stage of development, and he's going to parallel Freud's stages, right? At each stage of development, we're represented with a crisis. It's a social crisis. So he's going to say that at each stage, right, we're going to be, in addition to the psychosexual aspects of Freud, there's a psychosocial crisis. And initially, in his initial week, you could trace it back to what was going on in Freud's stages. By the time you read his last work, if someone had read that and read Freud and been told that Erikson comes off Freud, a person would have scratched his or her head and said, let me see if I can redo this, but I don't quite see it. But we'll see it to some extent. Now, what Erikson says, and he says that people who resolve each crisis toward the healthy end, that's a healthy personality. That's the way people were meant to be. That's his epigenetic principle. Okay? Now, as you can imagine, come back to me for a second. Thanks. As you can imagine, people who are radical cultural determinists don't like this theory either. Now, what he's going to tell you is, look, what determines a healthy resolution can be determined by society. It can be determined by society and social standards, right? But in the end, there's a certain way that people were meant to be. And when the crises are not resolved properly, then people go off in the wrong direction and they become mentally ill. And he's kind of telling Freud, he doesn't want to battle with Freud, and he had tremendous loyalty to Anna Freud, who was loyal to her father. He doesn't want to battle with Freud the way I see the humanists will. They'll say to Freud, forget it, you're wrong. But he's going to tell Freud, you're wrong, but you've looked at the thing from the wrong angle. He's going to tell Freud, I don't disagree with you, but we're going to see in the end that he basically does. Let's go back to the PowerPoint for a minute. What he says is that from this healthy resolution, at each stage there was, let's go back to the PowerPoint. At each stage there was meant to be a healthy resolution and an unhealthy resolution. But the healthy resolution is not here. It's here. You see it? Used to have a line there, but it screwed it up. It's to be mostly trusting, but a little bit mistrusting. A little bit understanding that the world is not perfect. So come back to me. What are the words that we have for people who are completely trusting of everyone? We have words for them. Go ahead, push it down.
Naive.
Naive, there's one. What else? Gullible. Who said you push it down? Gullible. Not such nice words. Suckers. There's a sucker born every minute. Right? You know what?
Some call them honest people.
Well, maybe. But honest people ought to be able to spot dishonest people and not fall for their tricks. I was just reading out about fishing. You know this? Let's go to the overhead. Fishing. Does anyone know this? Whoops, my fault. This term? I just read about it. Okay? These are people, fishing is doing the following. Come to me so you'll know. They manage to go in and steal the codes, apparently that's not too difficult, of something like a bank or AOL or something, and then they hack into you. I mean, it takes double, and they steal your number or something from the bank, or they get it and they say, we know you're a customer of so-and-so bank. We're updating our records. Please fill out the following form. And they ask you, is your address the same, and this and that. And in the course of it, they get your social security number and sometimes your bank account. Bang, you're finished. And usually what they do is that they'll run up a charge of a couple of $100. Well, you do that a couple of thousand times and you got a lot of money. Don't ever fill that stuff out. You'll notice, for instance, that AOL will tell you, I believe it's AOL, some of them, we never ask you for information over the internet. If something's wrong, we'll give you a call or we'll send you a letter because it's against fishers, right? And it's a huge crime. There was just an article, I think it was recently in New York, in U.S. News or someplace. I mean, you've got to watch out. Because some people, gullible sucker, you have to watch out. So in every case, a healthy resolution is not quite to the very end. Okay? Now let's go back to the PowerPoint. A person's social environment has an enormous effect on how a crisis is resolved. But it doesn't determine the order in which the stages emerge. Okay? Come back to me. So once again, we're going to hear, come back to me if you can, what Piaget said. Okay? We're going to hear what Piaget said, the same thing that Piaget said, the same thing that Freud said to some extent. The stages emerge in a predetermined order, right? And nothing changes that. However, the environment has an enormous effect on how things resolve. And we'll hear that again from the humanists. The environment has a tremendous effect. You must interact with the environment, says Piaget, but the order of the stages is going to remain the same. Let's go back to the PowerPoint. So what Maslow is saying is that there's a predetermined genetic plan of what constitutes a health of personality, namely a positive resolution at each stage. So what constitutes a health of personality is not arbitrary or socially determined. The epigenetic principle states that there's a universal, biologically determined conception of what a health of personality is. In every society, everywhere, people who are trustful, who basically are trusting until you prove otherwise, are more healthy than people who are basically mistrusting until you prove otherwise. People who get into social interactions, no matter what culture you're in, who feel basically other people are to be trusted unless they prove to you that they're not to be, are healthier than people who say, I don't trust anybody. You're all a bunch of people are basically rotten. That's unhealthy, no matter where you are. Okay? Now, the stages are sequential. Get my picture there for 1 second, but they are not hierarchical. Okay? Come back to me for a second. Okay. Every stage, we're going to have to go to another slide. We're going to have to go to, okay? So every stage, basically, the difference between hierarchy and sequence is very, very important for us to understand. Wait a minute, I'm finding it here. Okay, it's very important for us to understand the difference, how hierarchy and sequence are related to each other. Let's go back to the PowerPoint, okay? Okay. What is a hierarchy? A hierarchy says that stages come in order, and you have to successfully resolve, complete, equilibrate, have satisfied one stage before you go to the next one. In other words, you've got to get one stage right before you go to the next one. And if you don't, you're stuck there. Okay? That's a hierarchy. Okay? All hierarchical stages are sequential, but not all sequential stages are hierarchical. Come back to me and I'll explain that to you. You got it now? In other words, hierarchical theories say the stages come in order, and you got to get one right. You got to finish one before you go to the next. Okay? You got to resolve it. You have to equilibrate it the way Piaget says. You've got to get the logic of one stage down before you can go to the next. Maslow's going to talk about needs. His theory is hierarchy. You've got to get one need satisfied before you go to the next. Okay? For Freud and Erikson, I should have talked about this with Freud, but I never do because you get it better this way. For Freud, the stages are sequential. They come in order, but they're not hierarchical. They're coming, whether you get it right or not. If you have a good resolution or a bad resolution. Whether your oral needs are met or whether they're not met. The next one's coming. Here comes the anal stage. For Erickson's going to say the next one's coming. But if you don't get it right, it can have a negative effect on your subsequent personality. We saw it with Freud, fixations. Okay? Erickson's going to tell you that if you don't get one stage right, it's going to severely affect your ability to get subsequent stages right. For instance, he'll tell you the first stage, trust versus mistrust, is the first stage. That's equivalent for, okay, that's equivalent to Freud's oral stage. Okay, but he's going to tell you later on, way up there, there's a stage of intimacy versus isolation. Okay? There's a stage of intimacy versus isolation. Well, if you don't and intimacy doesn't just mean physical intimacy, the ability to make friends, the ability to cooperate with people, the ability to have positive relations with other people. Well, if you don't trust anybody, how are you going to do that? Right? Do you understand what we're saying? There's a stage that talks about feeling that you're capable of doing things. And then a later stage is getting an identity, who I am and what I am and what I can do in the world. Well, if you don't feel you're capable of doing much of anything, If you feel like you're inferior, how are you going to get yourself a decent role in the world? That's what he's saying. So it's like building blocks, and if a block is cracked, everything above it is going to be going like this. And if it's bad enough, it can topple over. Then don't worry, $150 an hour twice a week, we'll fix it up for you. But Erickson does talk about going back and fixing things, and he even talks about the ability to fix things at later stages, right? Okay, so this is the idea that we're going to go through stages, and what we're going to see is, at least initially, Erickson's going to try it hard, and I'm going to try to show it to you. Although most people that talk about Erickson don't relate it back to Freud these days. A social component to Freud's psychosexual stages. Okay, let's go to 6. To the overhead. Okay, here are the stages. You got it? There they are. Okay, you ready? That's done. I'm just kidding. Okay, there are the stages. You want to take a quick look? There they are. We're going to discuss them more now. Okay? Although I don't have a tremendous discussion of each stage on the slides, so you better listen. Okay? So here, let's do a comparison of stages. Here's Freud's stages. Okay? And let's go one, and here are Erickson's stages. Okay? See if you can put my name in the corner there. Erickson said, my picture in the corner there. Okay, Erickson says, my name, people put, as long as I didn't write stupid, it doesn't bother me. Put my name in the corner. Okay, Erickson says, the psychosocial equivalent of Freud's psychosexual oral stage is trust versus mistrust. In other words, okay, come back to me. In other words, he says, look, what's happening here is that your physical need to eat, to survive, is either being met or not being met. Okay? And based upon that, you come to a sense of either I trust other people or I don't trust other people. The world is basically a place to be trusted, or it's a place not to be trusted. The world basically supplies my needs, or it doesn't supply my needs. Okay? And he's going to tell you, what do we call the extreme of trusting nobody? No, not being a graduate student. That's not right. I don't trust anybody. Right? I got to read the handbook again. What are the rules? Yeah, go ahead.
Paranoid?
Paranoia, exactly. Erickson's going to say is the people who are paranoid, that's the extreme of not trusting people. Now, obviously, as you saw, it's not either one extreme or the other. There are places in the middle. But in the end, some people are just more trustful than the other. And the more trusting you are, up to the point where you're too trusting, where you're trusting and people can take advantage of you, the more trusting you are, the better off you are. And there can be people who are not paranoid, but they still don't trust people too much. That, says Erickson, is not good. It's not good. And when this gets deep into your personality, you'll often notice that people will be impugning to you motives of trying to, you know people like that, they're trying to take advantage of you. What's in it for you? Why are you doing this? Right? And that can also lead to saying, well, I don't trust anybody. If I don't trust anybody, people out to do me no good, I'm just going to take advantage of them. And therefore I assume, oh, they're taking advantage of me. So you got to watch out. We'll see Kohlberg's going to come to the same thing, but he's going to talk about it with logic. So that's the most important thing. And most people who deal in therapies, no matter where they come from, will tell you that the root of decent human interactions is trust. Humanists tell you the same thing. Trust. Trust. Rogers talks about trust, trust, trust. There has to be trust between the therapist and the patient. Trust, 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 trust. And an educational atmosphere has to be one in which there's trust. Right? The person's not out to get me. Okay? Now the next stage, okay, let's go. Freud, let's go to the PowerPoint again. Freud's anal stage is a stage of autonomy versus shame and doubt. Okay. A healthy resolution, healthy people are autonomous. Unhealthy people have shame and doubt. Come back to me now if you can. If you'll remember, this is the age of 1.5 to 3. Interestingly enough, some real super Freudian type Ericksonians, I had a lecture about a guy like this, I don't know too much about it because I don't know, but he said, this is when you stand up and all of a sudden your body's exposed, your genitals are exposed, before that you're crawling on the ground, right? And so there comes the ability of shame, and could be, okay? But this is the time when kids are exploring more than that in a more, I would say, normative way to explain that, where kids are exploring and trying to do the task that everyone has. If you have children, you will know that the watchword of 2-year-olds is no. No, 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 no. I want to be autonomous. Or me do it, me do it. Or if your kid has a short name, right? Then the kid will mention the name. My oldest kid's name is Avi, short name. Avi do it, Avi do it, Avi do it. It's the task that people are supposed to. I'll never forget the time we go in there, right? And when he's in the back of the car, right? I'm standing up. I didn't tell you that, okay? In the back of the car, and he's standing, and he's in the back seat, right? In the car seat, whatever. And he's gonna, in those days, you put the kid in the car seat in the back. I guess you still do, right? Back facing the other way. So the kid, so he's there, and he gets up, and he gets here, right? And he's standing ready to get out of the car, you know, and he's little, he's only 2, so he could stand between the floor of the car door, and he's going like this, trying to get, and he falls. I grabbed him. He looks up at me like this. He says, "Avi, do it!" Screams at me just like that. Goes over and scrambles back into the car. I said, wait a minute. I'll let you do, but wait, let me, because we were over the sidewalk, so I backed up the car a little until he was over the grass, right? Goes like this. So he looks at me, goes, sound familiar? 2 years old, right? This is autonomy. I can do it. He looked, he did it twice. He looked, he's just the distance where I could run to catch him. He goes like this again, one more step back. Then he goes like this. And he caught himself, and he managed to, just get up, and he stood up, and he looks at me like this. Told you I could do it, right? I want to do it. Now what happens, of course, and you can see the shame and doubt coming out from the whole question of toilet training. Oh, you're dirty, you did it wrong, you're bad, but that's part of it. No, if you say no, 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 if you say you're bad, you shouldn't have done it this way, I'll sit down again so we can get closer. You can see my face again. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Okay? Then the kid begins to have shame, doubt. There's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with me. I'm shameful. I shouldn't be doing this. Right? There's something bad about this. And people who have doubts about themselves, when I try something, it's not going to work out. I can't. There's a lot of overlap here in my mind between this and the next stage, but I cannot accomplish the basic tasks. And if I try to go do something, people say you're bad, you get a sense of self-doubt all the time, a sense of shame. I'm going to tell you what a friend once said to me. It was my friend. He was a really good pianist. He was offered scholarships. And he told me his father once said to him, and I'm going to use the real words so you get the idea. He said to him, everything you touch turns to shit. I'm using that word on television, but you'll notice that the last word, the S word, is related to this, to anal kind of stuff. The father had it in mind. And he was always full of self-doubt. I had one other friend in college who was a composing major and became a fairly well-known composer. He said, this guy, I'll use his first name, nobody will know who he is. He said, Henry was a fine pianist, really good. And these were the 2 guys who were the musicians, right? I met him years and years later. Matter of fact, it was only about 4 or 5 years ago. And we were friends in high school, so it was years later, 40 years later. Okay, 45 years later, whatever, 40. And he hadn't done much with his life, nothing. He had been married a couple times, it didn't work out, and he'd gone to live in a couple countries, and it didn't work out. And what are you doing now? Nothing much. And there was a total sense of self-doubt. He's trying to do, right? So it's very, very important to give kids a sense of autonomy. Let them try things, let them do it. I want to do it. And of course, when they do it, they're going to make mistakes. You think I wanted the kid to fall on his face? Now, of course, there has to be some self-doubt. If a 2-year-old says, I can cross the street by myself, right, and it's Cullen Boulevard, or it's some other busy street, you say, no, you can't. And sometimes you have to know what you can't do well, right? When the electricity goes out in my house, I'll go take a look in the fuse box, right? If a fuse isn't switched, I call somebody. When I bought a new house and contractors this, and they said, well, you can do this yourself. Here, I'll show you how to do it. I said, get away from me. And I don't want to die, right? Now, it could be that there's self-doubt there, because he said it's an easy thing to do, but at some point, but he himself also, there was a certain thing where you have to lift up. They used to wire the lines right from your house to the roof where it goes in. Now, it turned out to be too dangerous. And it has to be lifted up. You know what I'm saying? The lines have to be X number of feet off your roof, the electric lines going into your house. If you have an older house, it's not that way. They're built going right into the roof. You just bought a house? You think it's okay? You better check, because, okay, but... And so this contractor can do anything as far as I'm concerned. I mean, he's really good. There was something wrong in the garage. He said, they messed it up. He said, I'll figure it out. Came to this, he said, I don't want anything to do with it. Comes electricity, he said, call an electrician. I don't want anything to do with it. Because he knew he had to. So again, it wasn't, I can do anything no matter what, if I know my house is burning down, right? He said, this is too hard. This you need a professional electrician to do. He grounded the plugs, he did this, and when it came to that, he wasn't monkeying around with it. And he said, in theory, I know what to do. He said, but this is, so you understand what I'm saying? So this is the part, that little part of doubt that knows when you can't do it. And that's healthy, to know when you've reached your limits. Okay? But on the other hand, if you're constantly doubting about everything, it's not good. And this, to some extent, you'll notice, parallels people who have doubts, even about things people think they can do, this parallels the idea of, remember with Bandura, learned helplessness. I can't do anything, I'm not good for anything. But you'll notice how what Henry's father said to him is so close. You can see, Freud would say, that's why he used that word. It's back to the anal stage, right? Okay. Now the next stage, which he says parallels the Oedipal stage, let's go back to the PowerPoint, is initiative versus guilt. You'll notice that guilt is part of the whole Oedipal thing. The watchword at this stage is why? Let me try, okay? The difference here is this is doing the tasks in autonomy that everybody can do. Getting out of the car, turning on the light, sticking stuff into the plug. You better not do that if you're two. Keep the kid away from the plugs when they're two, right? You don't want to start that. Or you just put here, come back to me, okay? Just put your finger on the metal part to line it up into the plug. Oh, that's all you need, right? So, but initiative is trying new things, trying different things, exploring, going around. That's when the stuff breaks in the house, and let's see what's going on, and try this, try that. Kid gets into remember, this is age 3 to 6. Finger painting and slopping and trying to do that and try to do this. And I want to do what Daddy does. I want to do what Mommy does, banging the hanger and doing this and trying on all the stuff. But and building my own things. And this is also where part of creativity comes in. I'll never forget the time when again, it's my older son, I remember. He lived in Israel until he was about 3. And he comes in, and in that time in Israel, everything was in cardboard boxes. Everything came in cardboard boxes, right? So, if you're old enough, you remember when that was true in the United States too. But Israel is to be a step behind the U.S. And so you'd bring the boxes, and to a daycare, and they'd glue them together. They called them glue-togethers. In Israel, in Hebrew, comes out one word, right? And one day he takes it and he puts it on his head and he says, a hat, right? He says, now, is that really a hat? I looked at her. I said, if you want it to be a hat, it's a hat, right? Because he's experimenting, he's making things. What can I use this for, right? This kind of thing, bringing stuff home. I remember one day he comes home And he's yelling out at the top of a voice, "Turtle, turtle, turtle, turtle." I go outside. He found that we lived at the edge of a city that was right next door was already a rural, farms. So we were right between the city and the farm, and there was a big turtle in the street, right? And he's got it picked up, right? And he's carrying it like this. The thing was half his size, right? Upside down. And he wants to explore with a turtle. So I say, "You put it down. It's not nice." He said, "The turtle doesn't feel good that way." And all the kids are running around him. He said, "Okay." So he puts it down on the railing on the porch, right? And I think he knew it was going to run away if he didn't. So the turtle goes up and back, and you can tell the turtle was scared. It starts to defecate. It couldn't get away, right? It's on this railing, it's a stone railing. I said, "Put it in the grass. If he put it in the grass, that's where he wants to be." "No." Right? I said, "Put it in the grass. It'll be good." "No, I want to play with him." Right? So finally I got him to agree to play with him in the grass. Then he got tired of it and the turtle ran away. Right? But this walking, remember when kids are this age, they start to walk on sticks to see if they can walk, exploring, what can I do? Taking initiative. There's a log, they try to walk on it. And of course they, "Don't you fool down, don't do that, it's bad. Everything you touch is terrible, it's no good." Then the kid begins to feel guilty about everything you do. And it's easy to do that. Kid's trying to something, falls down, tries to turn on a lamp, it breaks down. Falls down and breaks. You're bad. You're bad, you're bad, you're bad. That's why some therapists will tell you, never say to the kids, "You're a bad boy or a bad girl." It's just, "You're a good person, I just didn't like what you did this time." Or, "Let's see how we can do it so it works out." Okay? And from Erickson's point of view, guilt is not only in this interaction with, Oedipal conflicts and want to sleep with your opposite sex parents and all that stuff. It also comes from, there's a social aspect to it. Do you feel that if you take initiative that you're okay? Or do you feel that there's something wrong with you? Do you feel guilty about every time you take an initiative? And Erickson's going to say this thing, for instance, remember he talked about guilt and competition. Freud talked about that's a characteristic of people who haven't resolved the Oedipal stage. Erickson's going to say what's really happening here is that when you've tried things and gone up against people, even if anybody, that happens to all of us. You go into someone, you have a competition, and you feel bad for the other person. Well, one of you had to win, right? And you'll notice professional athletes, you can see that they have admiration for the other people. But they're glad they won, right? John McEnroe, you could tell, for all of his screaming and yelling, you could tell he genuinely was appreciative. That's why he became a good commentator. He's genuinely appreciative of other people's abilities. But he wanted to beat them, and he got ticked off when they beat him, right? If the person opposite beat him, if he beats me, I'm ticked off. He would tell you that, right? And so he didn't hate the other person, he didn't hate it, but he wanted to win. Because he wanted to take the initiative, and he thought he was the best player, right? And he had tremendous initiative. He had a certain sense of himself. I don't know if you remember, when he was a player, some of you hear him commentating down the tennis. I know some people, I like to watch tennis, up and back. I like it anyway. Bjorn Borg won the Wimbledon 5 years in a row. He was unbeatable. McEnroe beat him. Because he had a sense of initiative. I can do it, I can try it, it'll be okay. Okay? And so you have to be very careful to let kids, and of course if you have too much initiative, once again, you're going to try things that are going to really hurt other people. That's no good. Next stage, which is related to Freud's latency stage. Let's go back to the PowerPoint. Latency stage is industry versus inferiority. You notice remember, the latency stage is age 6 to 12. And it's related to one's feeling. This is when Freud admits, come back to me, Freud admits we're talking here about getting skills. Erickson said, "Oh, this is not a place where you say, oh, wait a second, where you say, oh, I'm just, never mind, the psychosexual tension is down and I'm not terribly interested." That's what Freud said. It was just a boy thing, right? Erickson said, "No, that's not true." He said, what happens here is we either get a sense of industry, of can-do. that it's not just a matter of taking initiative, but when I take initiative, I can do things. And now I'm learning not just the skills like turning on a light and getting out of the car and all this, but I'm learning the basic kind of skills that society expects from me. I can read, I can write, I can do the math, I can maneuver around, I understand what's going on, I can drive. That's toward the end of this. It's a little bit later than that. I can drive, I can do the things. I have the skills that are required to be able to do things well. Okay? Versus a sense of inferiority. Everybody's seen this. A sense of incompetence, says Piaget. A sense of helplessness, says social learning theory. You notice that information processing doesn't talk about emotions at all. But they do tell you, you've got to give kids the strategies by which they can get a sense of being able to do something. I mean, you can tell that the fact that information processing doesn't talk about emotions at all, to me, is a real deficit in the theory, a major deficit. Kids aren't computers. They have feelings and emotions. But here, in sense of industry versus sense of inferiority, sense of can do versus can't do. And this is where you get this whole idea of, I can't do it, I'm helpless, you're disabled, blah, 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 blah. I have to tell you, I have a big fight with the politically correct people around here. It's the Center for Students with Disabilities. I like the word handicapped. Why? Disabilities means disability. You can even see it if you go to the sign there. It's dis written in little letters and ability written in big words, big letters. A handicap means it's like a handicap horse race, right? When they give a horse a handicap, like they give it a handicap, put 5 pounds in the saddle, because that means we think the horse can do it. It's just requires a little more. It's going to take a little more effort, right? I think you can do it. Oh, they get mad at me. Some guy gives me the word handicap means you're cap in hand begging on them. But the idea is, yeah, go ahead.
Sometimes, like for my family, they'll call me a nickname, and they'll say they'll call me Crip. Say, hey, take the Crip here, take the Crip there. Short for crippled.
Right.
But it's a family thing, right? So then oh Lord Jesus. Okay, so it's like okay, so it's like when a stranger or somebody will come up, and the family goes, yeah, take the Crip here, take the Crip there. They'll be like, why are you calling him Crip?
Right.
Why are you calling him that?
That's right.
Why?
Yeah, exactly. I don't guess you won't mind. The person who just talked, he walks on crutches. I guess you don't mind that I say that, right? So the point is right. But what's happening here is that within the family, you can be called that name because they're already telling you, forget about it. We know you can do it, right? Forget about it. I've seen him, by the way. He gets around fine, and he does what he goes fine, and he gets where he wants, and he's got it figured out, right? Interestingly enough, by the way, that is one part of feeling industrious. That if I can't do something, I'll figure out a way to get it done. Whether it's something physical, right? Or whether it's something, all right, I'll tell you, one of the proudest moments of my life was when I realized math is not my thing. But I know the right mathematician to go to get the answer I want. That's a sense of industry. I don't know the ones not to go to. Unfortunately, the one I usually go to, or the statistician, is on leave this semester and is annoying me, right? But just got the word, he'll be back, good. Okay? Because he's the one I trust, and that's a sense of industry on my part. If I have a problem, I can formulate the problem well, and I know where to go to get the answer that in which I have trust. The same kind of thing. I know what to do, figuring things out. I can do things. If I take on a project, it'll be okay. I can learn things. I can accomplish things. I can do these kinds of things, right? And actually, that nickname that your family is calling you is there telling you, we think you can do it. Right? It's a joke. Right?
It's just like a humorous thing,
Exactly.
Many people have disabilities, but it's like a humor, kind of like it's no big deal, like a humorous thing.
Exactly. That's the thing. It's no big deal. to us. We know you're okay. And it's very interesting how some people who have kids with certain kinds of physical handicaps, right, they don't let the kid go out and try. They don't let the kid take initiative, and they give kids a sense of inferiority. You better not try because you can't do it. That's not so good. That's not so good. That's really bad, as a matter of fact. Go ahead. And it's bad with students, too. Go ahead. Yeah.
I teach autistic children K through 5th, and that's the big thing we have with all of our parents is they try to do everything for their children. And so we get them in 5th grade, and they're still not potty trained, and their parents are, well, they can't do it. And we're going, no, they can do it. They've learned not to do it. It's that learned helplessness.
Not to take initiative, and I'll bet some of those kids are convinced that they can't do it. Say it again.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because that's a sense of inferiority. See, these things build on each other. If you don't have a sense of initiative, if you have a sense, I can't do anything, or if I try it, I'm going to mess up, that's the guilt that, in turn, it leads to a sense of inferiority. It's very hard to have a sense of industry when you do that. And so it's tough, and it's tough to know what to do, right? It's tough to know what to do, and it's look, I'll tell you, I work with a person who's sharp as a tack, and she's a friend of the family, and she's very old now, and she forgets things, and so people are trying to get her help, and she said, I don't want it. And finally she said, you're taking away from me the last thing I can do myself. Like, let's have a nurse come and lay out your medicines. When you're 90, believe me, you have 50 million medicines, or in your 80s, right? She's not quite that old, but, you know, and we're afraid she's going to forget, right? And her kid talks to me and says, I'm afraid. And she said, you're taking away the last thing from me. That's what he told me. So this is a person with a sense of industry. I want to do it. I can do it. Leave me alone. And it gets to be difficult. And it's sometimes, you know, you got on the other side. So far, she's still around. So I guess she knows how to take her medicines, right? But that becomes the sense of what's going to happen and what are you doing, and a sense of achievement. And Erickson's going to tell you, if you're an elementary school teacher or dealing with elementary school children, right, that this is the main thing that they have to know, that you have to give to them, a sense of can-do. Look, let me say it again. Let's take a little vote here. How many people think that one of the very important tasks that schools can give is to give kids the knowledge that they need to be able to function in society? Yes or no? Who votes yes? Gee, just about everybody. Okay? How many people here think that you are able to give the 10-year-old in your class the knowledge that he or she will need, the computer knowledge, knowing how to run a computer, that will be on the market when that kid is 40, 30 years from now? Who thinks you can give the kid the knowledge of how to run a computer that's built in 2030 something? Anybody? Nobody. Well, make up your mind. Obviously, we can't do that, right? How can you do that? You can't teach kids what they're going to need, how to know. And the stuff that I learned, let me tell you something. I know how to make copies and to erase them on a typewriter like you wouldn't believe. How did you make copies on a typewriter, right? You put in the typing paper, and then you put in carbon paper, right? Carbon copies. And you have to be careful, because if you're going to erase, if you have a good eraser, there were typewriter erasers. Ever see the typewriter eraser with a wheel on? If you've ever seen an eraser with a wheel on the end and a brush on the other side, that's a typewriter eraser. But if you erase the carbon copy, the copy is good, but it smudges all the carbons. So you have to go in and, if each one, put in a card. Put in the card, right? Between the carbon and the carbon, put in a card. A 3x5 card. I think that's what they were invented for, to stop this, right? And the most important thing, especially when I learned to type, they didn't even have IBM balls. They had the things would come up, right? They would click up. And when you erased, if you let the erasers fell into the typewriter, it would gum up the works. So you would erase, and on the other side you had to brush it away. I remember the teacher would go like this. She would sit here like this, and would say, erase, then brush up. Brush up. She'd get out of her seat. Brush up. I can brush up like you wouldn't believe. It's junk now. Who cares? Just put on a spell check, it doesn't come out right, fix it and make another Xerox. What do you care? Print it up again. I can still see her with her white hair brush up. I mean, it's unbelievable. Okay? All kinds of skills that nobody cares about. Some of you here learn how to program in BASIC, right? My brother used to laugh at that. My brother, for years, was a computer guy. He got sick of it, but he did it for a year. He said, BASIC? He says, let's teach people how to write with quill pens. Nobody uses BASIC. But if you say, oh, it doesn't matter. Piaget is going to tell you it doesn't matter the logic of programming is what matters. Erickson is going to tell you it doesn't matter. What matters is kids feeling, I can handle computers. I don't. I feel, every time a change comes out on a computer, I go, oh. My brother loves it because he feels competent. I'll figure it out. I panic. How many people here, every time you get an update to your computer, you start to hyperventilate? They send it to you. Oh my God, that's a lack of industry. Something goes wrong, I don't know what to do. The other day, something went wrong on my computer. I couldn't get in to do the web page, and I figured it out myself. I started to hyperventilate. I couldn't believe it, right? And I was just piddling. And I was afraid I was going to mess up something, but I was so frustrated. And finally I got it. And I remembered the second. Today I went to do it again. I couldn't remember how to do it. But then wait. So it's for the undergraduate webpage. So it's this sense of industry. I can do it. I can take on new tasks. I can achieve things. I can do. That is the main tasks, says Erickson, of elementary school teachers. Why? Because in the end, you really can't teach kids what they're going to need to know. Everything changes. History changes. History changes. You know that? Look, I'll give you an example from my own experience. I went to high school in the 50s. Oh, man. Actually, I finished in the 60s, but in the 50s. Study about the Civil War. I'm in New York, Rochester, New York, the last stop on the Underground Railroad, right? You don't monkey around. I don't know people there. They still used to have a permanent exhibit there about the Underground Railroad. I don't know if it's still there. You know, hiding the slaves after the Fugitive Slave Act. Okay. We were right. They were wrong. The North was right. The Confederacy was wrong. That's it. Done. But when it came to Reconstruction afterwards, the period afterwards, you remember studying about Reconstruction, how horrible it was? There was an agreement. There was no agreement about the Civil War. There were still Civil War veterans alive, not too many. But the people who wrote the textbooks said, you know, there was no monkey around here, right? They were right. We were right. They were wrong. Done. The cause of the North was just. The cause of the South was unjust. And slavery was bad stuff. Done. No justification for it. And especially, you know, this was part of the history of the city, too. But when it came to the role of blacks in American society, there was a general agreement. Second-class citizens. Right? North and South was generally agreed. You can't imagine what it was like. I went to Israel for a year between high school and college. I came back in 1962. And I went to a department store, and a clerk came to me who was black. So black. I jumped a mile. I'd just never seen it before. And I came from parents, they were active in the civil rights movement. There was no monkey business here, right? It was all terrible stuff, right? The first time I saw a black face in a commercial, I jumped a mile. It just was so strange. You just never saw that. I'm talking about on television, right? You never saw that. The only black faces you saw were maids. Right? In a commercial, never. Bandages that had no color were called flesh-colored bandages. I guess depending. Yeah, if you were white, it was flesh color. If you weren't, they weren't. Right? It was unbelievable. There was just a general consensus, and the history of Reconstruction, whether you learned it in the North or the South, was that it was bad stuff. Remember the period when the Union occupied the South? Corruption. Oh, really? Sure, they were corrupt, those governments, but nothing like the Tweed Ring in New York at the same time. That was corruption. The politics in the South were more or less corrupt a place else. Right? And eventually, in the 60s, there came a school of historians that said the only thing that was wrong with Reconstruction was that it wasn't allowed to work. And blacks were re-enslaved under the what do you call it, system? Tenant farmer system. the attempts by blacks and poor whites to break that hold of that certain oligarchy was put down. That's how the Ku Klux Klan was formed. I don't know if people knew that. There was a movie made about how after the Civil War, poor whites and blacks got together to try to change Southern society. Unfortunately, they picked Muhammad Ali to play the leader of the slaves. That guy, if you got him spontaneously, there wasn't a more clever or interesting or fascinating guy that you saw. That guy, he was so funny, but he couldn't read a script. He had to be spontaneous, and he just didn't do a very good job acting, unfortunately. Right? But it was a fascinating story, and the Klan was supposed to put those people down. Right? And to reinstitute the Southern Oligarchy. That's what happened. And all of a sudden, there was a whole different perspective. As the Civil Rights Movement came along, and as there became a growing consensus in America that this making blacks second-class citizens is unconscionable, there was a reworking of history. There was a reworking of our fundamental understanding of history. You can see that all the time. When America was mostly an agrarian society, Jackson's People's Revolution was an agrarian revolution. In the 1930s, all of a sudden became an urban workers' revolution, because that's where the push for democratization came from, urban workers. I mean, everything changes. And so, but that doesn't bother me, because I got some kind of an understanding of history when I was an undergraduate. I still think I have a little bit of it left. So I understand how to approach history. I understood historical arguments. And I was able, as a new one came along, it didn't bother me, because I had a fundamental understanding. And I had a sense that I can understand history. I still do, probably not justified. But I still have a sense that I understand. I read magazines and all that stuff all the time. I subscribe to American History Magazine and all that stuff. But there's still a sense. I have a sense of industry versus that. Some great historian puts out a book, then I can read it and tell him whether he's full of bull or not. Even though I got a bachelor's degree 500 years ago, right? Doesn't matter, I have that sense, right? And that's what kids need, a sense that I can understand, I can do it, I can go for it, I can learn. And what Erickson is telling you is, look, that's the most important thing. Because the stuff you teach them, I must have said this 500 times already, it's really, I'm not so sure how important that is, with the exception of the basic skills. That's why these labels bother me so much. You're telling kids when it comes to the basic tools you need to function in society, there's something wrong with you. And I don't buy it. Just got through with a defense about how you've got to understand kids' development before you teach them how to read. We need, it was a doctoral dissertation defense. We need developmental markers. And if the kid has a recent developmental marker, then to understand phonics, then the kid doesn't understand logic phonics, don't do it. Okay, you can see here, let's go back to the PowerPoint. I was on my soapbox, wasn't I? Identity versus inferiority is age 6 to 12. Industry versus inferiority. Identity versus role confusion is age 12 to 18. Here, let's look again at Freud. Okay, and this is compared to the genital stage. Okay, adolescence, 12 to 18, right? Here, does that stay in the PowerPoint? Right? And you know what Freud said about adolescence. But come back to me for a second, okay, for a while. We already talked about the kid who comes in with a business suit in September, then comes back from Christmas vacation with the spiked blue hair, and then comes back from the spring break and wants to be a missionary to bring truth and light to the whole world from some religion or other. And then at graduation, shows up on a motorcycle, right? That kind of stuff. We know about that, right? Freud told us about that. That said, Erickson, is really what Freud was tapping into is the idea of who am I and what am I versus role diffusion. And kids have a first of all, who am I? What am I supposed to do? I have to tell you, if the undergraduates watch this, tough luck. I still see it in the undergraduate class. Oh, I'm on my 27th major, right? And this one's not interesting to me anyway, right? What am I going to do? Who am I? What am I going to do? And what's my role in life? Ericksonians identify what they call a psychosocial moratorium. Okay? The truth is that that adolescence doesn't end in America, usually until our 20s. Let's take how many people here from the time you were a kid knew I'm going to college? Okay, I'm just going to college. Look at all the age, just about everybody. Okay, which meant you're not making your own decisions as an adult, at least till you're 22, right? If you're lucky, you'll get through college in 4 years, right? It's an extended, what they call a psychosocial moratorium. You hear that, psychosocial? Right? Your adolescence is extended into your 20s. It was inconceivable to you weren't going to college. How many of you used to torture your parents when you were adolescents by saying, I don't think I'm going to college? Come on, admit it. Just 2 of us? See, we were the only 2 who were rotten enough to do that to our parents, right? Did it upset them? Oh, boy, did it ever, right? He's going like this. Yeah, sure, it upset him. Okay? That's because you're taking away, and of course, because they have your life planned out at least until then. Then you got to let go. You know what it was like with my kid? He goes to college, he gets a nice degree. He was doing tutoring and teaching on the side. Everything was fine. He's going to go be a teacher. He says, I think I'm going to California. I'm going to be a stand-up comic and an actor. There's nothing I could do, though. I mean, I had to support it. I supported it. I'm going to date this, but I don't care. Anybody see that commercial for, it's some singing group and everybody's saying somebody's name in an elevator? A new guy gets on the elevator, everybody says, Roy, 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 Roy. You know what I'm talking about, the Starbucks commercial? Who's seen it? My son is Roy. That's my boy. I was making a new commercial. And then the other one right after him. They begged him. He worked in summer camps. There was a, come on, be a camper. I mean, that's a good, you can make a, a nice life for yourself. Summer camping is a year-round thing. Planning and ordering. It takes a long time to get a 3-month summer camp or a 2-month summer camp organized. He was going to go into camping, and he says, "No, I think I'm going to go after my brother. I'm going to go into music." But there's nothing I could do. I told you who won the Emmy, by the way, didn't I? This tape is going to run for 20 years, so everybody's going to know my kid won the Emmy. All right. Anyway, you get the point. By that time, there was nothing I could do. You have to go to college, right? They knew it. We'll figure it out, but you have to. And what are you going to do? And the truth is, part of me was happy because I could sense that both of them were burning inside. This is what I want to do. This is who I am. That's a good sense of identity. I talked to the one who was an actor. I said, it's a hard living. I said, you want to think about doing something else? He said to me, he's already in his 30s. He said, are you nuts? Right? That's what he came. He said, are you kidding me? I just landed another commercial. Are you nuts? What about this project? What about that project? He's got a sense of identity of who he is. And when they say you got a fire in your belly for something, that's a sense of identity. Okay? And it gets tough. Right? Especially in our society, right? Now, there's some people here who can't stand what they were doing. They're getting a new degree. That's different. We'll see in the middle age. People get to middle age. There's something else. But the sense of who I am and what I am, and your sense of identity need not be through a job. It need not be through a job, right? There are people who volunteer all the time, through the church, through this, through that. They volunteer. They go to hospitals. That's fine. That's a sense of identity too. I'm working to make a living, but this is who I am. This is what I do. Right? This is my contribution to society. We'll get to that more. But this is what I am. This is who I am. This is what I'm part of. And it's tough. I remember the one who was a musician called me up. He said, I want to be the world's greatest percussionist. I want to be the world's greatest composer. I want to be the world's greatest, I can't remember what else it was. Oh yeah, band. He was going to be in a band, a music arranger. I said, well, you got to make up your mind. You can't be them all. Got to make up your mind. And he said, why can't I be as good a percussionist as so-and-so? I said, he practices 6 hours a day. I said, you want to practice the marimba and the drum 6 hours a day? He said, no. I said, so you don't want to be the world's greatest percussionist? He finally called me and said, I want to practice composing 6 hours a day. I said, okay, now you have your sense of identity, who you are. Of course, he didn't win the Emmy for composing, but you get the point. There's a sense of who I am, right? And that's also, some people, anybody got married 18 years old, been married 100 years, everything's wonderful. That person's sense of identity is I'm a mother or a father or a family person, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But it's who you are and what you are. It's very difficult, you will notice, to get a sense of identity if you have a sense of inferiority. What are you going to do? I can't do anything. Right? Now, there's one other thing that Erikson did. If you notice, all the theories we've talked about now, the stage theorists, Piaget, Freud, they all stopped at adolescence. And for a long time, that was the feeling. Piaget and Freud were the ones who recognized that kids are not little adults. But once adolescence came, puberty, adolescence came, that was sort of the final stage. Erikson's big, 3 more times, big contribution was that he talked about adult development. He realized there's some difference between 30-year-olds and 50-year-olds and 70-year-olds. There was somebody named Gail Sheehy who a few years ago, maybe it was 10 years ago, wrote a book called Passages about adult development. And people accused her of, they said that she plagiarized from Erikson. I looked at this stuff. I didn't read it in detail, but I looked at this stuff. I don't think she did. She didn't do it consciously. It's just that it's so hard to talk about adult development without talking about the stuff that Erikson talked about. He was the guy who did it. Now you're going to start seeing yourselves in here. So Erikson talked about the next stage, which is adult development, a major contribution. Okay, the next stage he talked about, let's go to the PowerPoint, okay, was intimacy versus isolation, 20s, people in their 20s, okay? And actually, as I told you before, let's come back to me. Actually, as I told you before, later on, this was initially, he realized, the Eriksonians realized, it may start actually in the middle 20s and go into the 30s. This is a sense of whether you can develop intimate relations with other people or whether you have a sense of isolation, right? People are extremely isolated. We call them alienated or sometimes a schizoid personality, okay? And intimacy is, he talks about sexual intimacy. Remember, Freud himself talked about the difference about sex just for the sake of a physiological need and sex and intimacy, right? Erikson already, I'll say it, he got over this stuff about homosexuality, heterosexuality. It didn't matter to him. The question was, can you find another person and develop this kind of an intimate relationship? But it wasn't just that. It was also, can you, in other kinds of situations, can you cooperate with people? Can you work together? Can you be a team player or you want to hog the ball all the time, metaphorically, right? Can you go into a job and work with others? And that's a kind of intimacy. There's an intimacy there. Obviously, it requires trust. It requires having a good sense of your ability to produce and do things. Can you imagine a person, here, let's go back here, come back here. A person, let's go back to the PowerPoint, who has no trust, who has a sense of inferiority, who feels guilty about everything, who doesn't really know who he or she is. Can you imagine that person developing a sense of intimacy with other people in a work situation, a social situation, in a one-on-one human situation? How can you do it? And that's what Erikson is saying. There can be sickness. But I got to tell you a story. I shouldn't tell you this, right? I worked in a clinic for a long time, and actually I was working with a kid of this family, but I met them, right? Because I was doing the education stuff. There was one man in there. To say he was obnoxious, to say that being near him made your skin crawl, to say there was just something about him that was fundamental. He would attack people. He was just a miserable human being, right? To say all that it's like saying that the Pacific Ocean is damp. This guy just had to be near him. I didn't even work with him. He was just... and you could tell, the therapist was very Eriksonian. Matter of fact, he did a second doctoral dissertation on Erikson's theory. He said the guy has a sense of complete inferiority. That's why he lashes out at other people. He feels guilty about everything he does. He doesn't trust anybody. I don't know how and his wife was the most decent, kind, healthy human being I'd ever seen. I don't know what she saw. First of all, I don't know how he ever had the guts to approach her. She married him, and she loved him. She honest to God loved him. I don't know why. You know, this thing, you can see what's behind all the other stuff. She could see. She could see that despite his sense of inferiority, he was a creative person. Even though he belittled everything he did, she was impressed by it. And he finally convinced her. She finally convinced him that she really, really, really loved him. And he began to trust her. Let's do this. Here, let's go back to the PowerPoint. I'll just put my picture in the corner if you can. She finally convinced him that the stuff that he did was good. And that if he failed, it was okay. He didn't have to be ashamed of himself. She didn't use those words. And slowly, slowly, that he was okay. He finally began to see what he could do and what he couldn't do, what kind of person he was, and get a sense of identity. Okay, come back to me now. By interacting with this healthy person, this sense of intimacy that she grabbed onto, and she was good. I mean, you could just tell she was something. I mean, I talked to the therapist. You know, I only met her a couple of times, but he told me she's a rock. She's a solid. He said, I don't understand how I don't understand how she even got near this guy, but she did. And slowly, so by the time I saw him the last time, he was a normal human being. He didn't lash out at people. I mean, he would sit in the waiting room and attack other people sitting in the waiting room. Right? Will you please stop doing that, or how you're so obnoxious? Or this is how you come to therapy in those clothes. I mean, it was nuts. He was just a horrible human being. He stopped. So what Erickson is telling you is it doesn't only work this way, it works the other way. There's something else he's telling you now that we got to the adult stages. The ages at which I'm giving the stages are the age at which the most psychosocial energy is concentrated. But in fact, we're always worrying about all the stages at all the time. We're always worrying. We can always be made feel guilty. We're always worrying about, can I trust other people? And do people trust me? We're always worrying about our sense of ability to do things. Even when we're at lower stages, the higher stages, for instance, the higher stages looking back and saying, did I do things okay, or did I screw up my life? We're always doing that. Right? So this intimacy versus isolation was in the 20s, right? This is a sense of going out and making yourself part of society. Interacting with societal institutions in an acceptable way, not isolating yourself from society, from other human beings. And out of that comes relationships with other people. Okay? Healthy relationships with other people, including the people you might pick for a sexual partner if that's the one you're doing, right? And marrying or doing whatever, etc. Okay? Let's try one more stage here. Okay? This is, again, the next stage. Oh, I messed up. What's going on here? Where are the ages? There. Just bear with me, bear with me. Whoops. There we go. Okay? The ages here is what he calls generativity versus stagnation. Now you'll notice he's got most of adulthood in here before old age. So this takes up a lot of a person's life, from the 30s to the 60s, right? And remember, it has no comparison to Freud, of course, because it's adulthood, and it's generativity versus what he calls stagnation or self-absorption. Okay, come back to me now. Now, initially, when Erikson first did this, generativity for him was having and raising children. It's leaving something, it's generating something, it's creating something, it's leaving something to the world and to the next generation. And he concentrated heavily on raising children. Now, you can see it's going to be pretty hard to do that and to raise children well and to be generative if you can't get a sense of intimacy. Right? If you watch the movie, the show Everybody Loves Raymond, man, is that a funny show. But you can see one of the problems there is the lack of is the sense of intimacy between the two sons and the mother. By the way, I'm convinced even if this tape runs for 5 years, Everybody Loves Raymond reruns will be on for that long, right? That's how great, it's funny as can be. But that's it. A sense of, and raising children, and that's still a huge part of it. But even early on, people said to them, wait a minute. What about these orders of nuns? Teaching orders of nuns. In the old days, you go into a Catholic school, all the teachers were nuns. And they're dedicating their whole lives to raising, to educating children. You don't think that's generative? He said, yeah, that's generative too. I got to tell you one story about my aunt and my cousin. I'll tell you even first time, my cousin Florence. She was a real goofball. You would say to her, Florence, you want to go sit on the porch? She'd say, no, I have my certain energy quota that I expend every day, and if I walk out to the porch, that's expending some of my energy quota that I will need. I only have enough energy to walk to the bathroom, brush my teeth, and wash, and then walk into bed. And we would take Florence, she would do things, she would come with us, but we got to go home now, my energy quota is being expended, right? Florence, she was the classic bad movie old maid school teacher. I don't know if she had any friends. She was friendly with her brother and with her cousin. My mother was her cousin, that kind of stuff, family and all that stuff. But from everybody said she spent her whole life teaching first graders and was proud of it. I was a kid myself, but from what I heard, she did a damn good job of it. Somebody would come and she'd say, I can't do anything today. Want me to come over? We're going to come over. She'd call, don't come over. I overused my energy expenditure for today. I'm going to have to get some of it back tomorrow because I had to do this and this and this for the kids. There was never any doubt, right? The rest of us, she'd blow off, but the kids, she did it. That's a generative person, even though she was a little wacko, right? Okay? Creating things. Now Erikson is going to tell you creating a work of art is not because you're nuts, because you're suppressing something and it's coming out in this way. It's because you're leaving something beautiful for the next generation. Right? That kind of thing. Writing music, etc. Do you want to say something?
Yes, I just want to clarify that story I gave you about my family.
Oh, he's feeling bad now for his parents.
Real quick, my bad. I left out a lot of information. When my dad was working there at the family business, we had the same name, so they came up with a nickname, and they asked me first, and I said, sure, Right. So they would ask me. I have another family name, too, which I'm not going to say, but because it's kind of different. Anyways.
See, he feels bad that he read it on his family. Yeah. It's obvious what's going on there. Your family feels free to call you that name because they have absolute confidence in you. That's obvious. That's true. Right?
Yeah, and I graduated from college, and I was one of the first in that side of the family. And anyways, yeah, so
it's great. I mean, they have confidence in your ability. That's why they're doing it. Right, they know you're a generative person. That's right. It's interesting they brought it up when we came to this stage. Because they know he's a generative person. He can create things and do things. And so this idea of generativity and being able to do things and create things and leave things, it's very important. And this is the basis for a midlife crisis. Talk about, I've been doing this for 25 years, I'm 40 years old, or 45 years old. It's just, this is what teacher burnout is. I'm just going through the motions, I'm not really doing anything meaningful. Teacher burnout? When I say teacher burnout, whose soul am I touching? There's one burnout. Who else has said, I got burnout? Come on, raise your heads, be honest. This room is full of people like that. Not all of them are honest, because some say, oh, not me, right? I'm not being generative. I'm not being creative anymore. It's enough already. My wife, after teaching I don't know how many years in school, said, I got to have a different school. Same job, different school. So what are you doing? She said, leave me alone. She landed a different job, different school. She said, it was just the same old, same old. It's different kids, a slightly different atmosphere, right? You watch me. Empty nest syndrome comes from this. My generativity is raising kids, raising kids. You know about empty nests? Now what? They're gone. What am I supposed to do? You know, right? What am I supposed to do? It all comes from this need for adults to be generative. Okay, we'll take this question after the break because time's up. Okay, let's take a break and we'll have your question first thing afterwards.